episode number 116 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. So today I'm going to welcome Dr. Magarelli, who I had in episode 111, and unfortunately we only had 30 minutes. It was a misunderstanding, so it was only 30 minutes that I was able to ask questions, and I had more questions for him. So he decided to come back, and if you guys want to get more information on his background, you can go to episode 111. So welcome back, Dr. Magarelli.
My pleasure, Michelle. It's a beautiful day. How are you?
Good. So we're going to continue where we were last time, where we ended.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask you about ERA,
Sure.
endometrial receptivity analysis.
Yes. Well, it started originally as ERA stood for endometrial receptivity assay.
Mm-hmm.
And there was only one company, it was iGenomics. And what the hypothesis was that, and it had been studied in animal models and other models, was there are a set of genes that must be turned on exactly during the implantation window. And iGenomics looked at about 212 of them. And what they were able to calculate was, given a standard dose of progesterone, because that's the only thing that matters. Your estrogen, you have to have a certain lining, but then once you have a certain lining, which is 7 millimeters trilamina for an embryo transfer, you typically have to give a certain amount of days. And if you mimic nature, 12 plus 6 is 18. So days 17 to 18 are your implantation windows up to day 19. So from 17 to 19. So given 6 days of progesterone, which was the standard, it made sense based on our biology, what genes get turned on in those cycles where there's pregnancy and what genes don't.
Mm-hmm.
So they studied those genes and they found that they could actually predict pretty well in about 25% of cases what genes were not turned on, which caused the patient not to get pregnant. And then we're able to calculate how many days, either more or less, you would need to get all those genes turned on. Mm-hmm. And so that's what was called the implantation window. So what they do is they report a number. It's either it's either not long enough for pre-receptive, receptive, or post-receptive. So mm-hmm. That was how it started. And then Cooper Genomics, which is another genetics company, they came out with another one. And part of my problem with any test is if only one company does the test, you got to be suspect. So a second company came out. And by the way, there were lots of publications associated with it. And so they came out with the ER peak. So you had the ERA, now the ER peak. So now you can just say, the ER, the endometrial receptivity analysis, because it's not really assay, and it's not really peak. So the ERA, call it the ERA. It's like calling tissue paper a Kleenex.
Right.
Go to Kirkland.
Or Q-tip.
Exactly. Exactly. Or Charmin's or something. So that's what it's for. Now, who uses it? This is the key. Now, it's about $1,000. So, and as you know, in my practice at CMY Fertility and before at Magarelli Fertility Centers, our goal was to make sure that whatever treatments we're doing are cost effective and efficacious. And we don't want too many add-ons if they really don't help. And honestly, only about 25% of cases are the reason why people don't get pregnant is because their window is they're not in sync. Mm-hmm. So it really only helps, 1 in 4 couples. Mm-hmm. Now, who do I use it on initially? I don't offer it to everyone. I mean, it's on our website, but I don't offer it to everyone. But if you have had a chromosomally normal embryo transferred and you don't get pregnant, before you put in another chromosomally normal embryo, I strongly feel that those couples, and in those couples, 75% of those couples will be helped. So
Got it.
75% of 25, right? You kind of got that. So those are the folks I would offer it to.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone can have it, and maybe everyone should have it. But since it's if it was $50, $100 a test,
Right.
or maybe $200 a test, but $1,000, that could mean in our program, that could mean you don't do a frozen embryo transfer because you can't afford it. So you have to balance that. So if your patients are having implantation failures, even without chromosomally tested embryos, if you've worked them up for implantation failures and they're not implanting and you're scratching your head, even though they're not chromosomally tested, in a young woman under 35, if you've done that 2 or 3 times and they're still not getting pregnant and you've checked everything else, like the uterus out, hormones out, alcohol, tobacco is not being used, those kind of things, then you might want to suggest the endometrial receptivity assay.
So the main reason why is to see the exact time window that would be ideal. And in so doing, is it also like an endometrial scratching?
Well,
because
you know what?
You need to do that.
Yeah, because in a sense, now I'll talk about endometrial scratching in just a second, but my answer to you is that is exactly right, because you are biopsying or scraping. So what I should tell you how to do the Yeah. The way you do an ERA test is you give the patients exactly what you would do for an embryo transfer, typically frozen embryo transfer. This doesn't apply to fresh embryo transfer, just so you know. This is only frozen.
Got
it. You typically do the whole cycle as if you're going to do a transfer, but instead of putting an embryo in, you take a sample out, you scratch or take a biopsy of the lining. So yes, you hit 2 birds with 1 stone in that case.
Right. And then just so people know, like if they've never heard of it, why would the endometrial scraping benefit people?
It does not.
Oh, it doesn't? You don't think so?
No, I do not believe in thinking. I believe in data.
Oh, yes. Sorry. I should know this.
I'm not a thinker.
Yeah,
as my best friend says, you're a data do doctor.
Yes.
Data doctor. I can't help it. I'm not going to change at 100 years old. I'm not changing. But Cochrane, which is one of the Canadian, it's a scientific organization that takes and does meta-analyses. Mm-hmm. And there have now been huge meta-analyses and individual papers which show no benefit whatsoever. And so I'm not a guy who doesn't, when I see, if I'm in a situation where the data is controversial, sure, I'll try it. And I have.
Right.
But if there's definitive, good, strong, non-controversial data, and you can look up the Cochrane team, Cochrane, Cochrane, and it irrefutably says, looking at all the studies, putting all the studies together, it doesn't do a hill of beans. So again, that's a procedure. People still do it, and I'm not against people doing it if they want to do it, because I'm not sure it does any harm.
Right.
But I'm a kind of a simple guy. If it works, I do it. If it's controversial, I might do it. But if it says it's not really helping, our poor patients have enough things thrown at them.
True.
They don't need another thing unless you're pretty darn sure, and this is again my personal approach to medicine, unless you're pretty darn sure that it's going to help the patient, I just don't have that. I don't believe it's the right thing to do.
Well, that's great information for people listening, because I didn't even know that. I didn't know that. I haven't heard that it was, because you'd think that if it's offered, there's a reason for it, or it's worth it.
Well, yeah. So I love pulling your leg as an acupuncturist, but you're probably doing lots of stuff that worked 3,000 years ago that you have no idea is benefiting anybody, but you assume it, right? Because you've not done the study. So I was joking about the Chinese medicine. The herbs may have worked in primeval China, but you have no idea in today. You don't even know if the herbs are the same herbs in a sense, right? Mm-hmm. How they're cultured. So it's just part of medicine, and then people want to do it. I'm not against them doing it, and there are people in our practice who strongly believe it's the right thing to do, but you're talking to me.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
talking to me.
You talking to me?
Right.
Okay.
Talking to me. Right.
And you're Italian.
Exactly.
So, okay. I mean, this is really good information. I'm really glad we're talking about this because I'm sure there's a lot of people going through the IVF process and not knowing that the studies don't really show any benefit to the scraping. So it's
Right.
very
And always going
valuable.
to medicine. It ebbs and flows. And I want to
Yeah.
make sure no definitive yes or no when it comes to reproduction. We are not allowed to do research on pregnant women. We're not allowed to do research on embryos. We're not allowed
Right.
to do an embryo implantation. We can only infer things. And if
Mm-hmm.
you can only infer, then you're gonna have controversy and you're gonna have confusion. And I
Mm-hmm.
try to tell my patients that, guys, we don't have a definitive answer. We're willing to try
Yeah.
things, and we're a practice that really is at the forefront of, yes, we're willing to try it and give you the benefit of the doubt. There are many people who have very strict rules, and I don't think that's fair because the data are not that strong. They're
Right.
good, they're not perfect by any stretch.
Yeah. And then last time you talked about fresh transfers coming back,
Yep,
which I found interesting because
yep,
most of the people that I treat are doing frozen. So,
yes,
and then you had spoken about how it really depends on the person. Like, who would benefit
yes,
from a fresh transfer and who would benefit from a frozen embryo transfer?
absolutely. Is that a question for
It's
me?
a question. Yeah, it's a question for you.
Okay, okay. I wasn't sure. That was a good segue.
Yeah.
So here's what I think. Um, if we look at the human uterus, right? It's if you whatever the estimates are, 5 million, 10 million. It's 10 million years of evolution.
Mm-hmm.
The uterus, the hormones, the how humans reproduce is about 10 million years of experience. And if we look at in vitro fertilization, we're at 40 years of experience, and really only about the last 15 have had monumental better understanding of how incubators work and blastocyst culture and vitrification, freezing of the embryo. So we have lots of newness to what we do. So if you have a patient who has an embryo, well, let's say she has an embryo, and she doesn't have PCOS and didn't hyperstimulate, where's the best place for it? Is it to freeze it and then do another cycle,
Mm-hmm.
especially if your progesterone is less than 1.5 and your estrogen is less than 3,000? Maybe the answer is let that beautiful uterus pick it out. Now you have a patient who has PCOS, she hyperstims, her lining is super lush, meaning it's overgrown because she's produced so much estrogen, and that
Mm-hmm.
estrogen has now ruined the lining. So if you freeze the embryos, let the lining slough, and then plan with the right amount of estrogen and progesterone the next month's transfer, then you see significant improvements in pregnancy rates. And that was the
Wow.
done by Dr. Shapiro out of Nevada. That's where he hit it out of the park. So then everybody inferred that if we do frozen embryo transfers, you'll have a better outcome.
Right.
So, and all of a sudden, you took one little piece, PCOS patients, hyperstimulation patients benefited, and now we said, okay, everybody's going to
So it's
benefit.
like a
And
blanket statement. Yeah. Yeah.
well,
Or
we like,
assumption.
yeah, and we like to have things set in little boxes because it makes our decision making easier.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that. As soon as it happened, I put everybody had to do frozen embryo transfers,
Mm-hmm.
everybody. And I looked at my data, right? And I saw what I thought I saw was about a 15% improvement if I did that. And that's what the literature said.
Mm-hmm.
But what I didn't do was the correct denominator. How many people did not get a transfer because the embryos didn't survive the thaw?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, now all of a sudden, that changes the whole way you look at the data. You're not
Right.
looking at
Yeah.
transfer, you have to look at per egg retrieval. How many people got pregnant per egg retrieval
Mm-hmm.
versus per embryo transfer?
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a lot of thinking. And then once you get it, you
Right.
go, of course, that makes sense. So when you look at pregnancy rates per egg retrieval in the United States the past 5 years, 10 years, we've gone down 15%.
Wow.
It is
That's a
scary
lot.
with a yes.
Wow.
And that's essentially due to frozen embryo transfers and pre-implantation genetic testing. Because I was 85% PGTA, freeze all. And because I was getting 60-70% pregnancy rates, I was like, woo, woo, I'm so good. Look at me. Ha ha. That kind of, and but if you actually look at it per egg retrieval, because you lose in the biopsy, you lose in blastocyst culture, you lose in vitrification, you lose in the thaw, and you could actually lose them simply in the process of freezing by literally losing an embryo because they're microscopic, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're dipping them in liquid nitrogen. That's the method. They could disappear, So you got to watch your denominator. That's my biggest issue with all medicine. Mm-hmm. A lot of studies hide the truth. And by the way, acupuncture is no different. When I hear people say, 80% of my patients get pregnant with acupuncture. Well, how many percent don't?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, nobody tracks them.
Yeah.
Nobody tracks them unless they're Dr. Credenda, right? Because she'll do
it's almost like you need to know how to track. I think that's really the key. It's just that we think we know how to measure the data, but it is a very specific science.
And so what I would say is, if a patient has numerous, well, let's talk about it 3 different ways, because I keep getting this question every time on lives and everything else is, you do 11 days of stimulation, and the reason you're doing 11 days of stimulation or 10 or 12, it doesn't matter, is to grow eggs that normally would die. So the first thing you're doing is allowing eggs that are there. You're not making eggs grow. You're making eggs that could grow. So every month, 1,000 eggs could grow, but in nature, only 1 egg, our bodies only produce enough hormone for 1 egg to grow. We throw away 999. So in IVF, we give the food, follicle-stimulating hormone, the brain hormone, at high doses to make things grow. So the first benefit of IVF is we're getting eggs that would normally die to grow. So we're never taking 1 extra egg. We're only taking the eggs that could grow and helping them grow. That's it. So that's a key concept. So we're never going to go through menopause early if we do 100 IVF cycles. You're going to go through menopause, whatever your chromosomes say. Then we get the eggs. And so what people don't realize is, let's use 20-year-olds because they're the ideal candidate. 70% of eggs are at, 50 to 70 let's use 50 because it sounds horrible. Let's use 50%. 50% of eggs in the 20-year-old cohort are abnormal. The eggs are abnormal. Just because you can grow them doesn't mean that those are normal eggs. Mm-hmm. So now you have 10 what look like beautiful eggs. We know that 5 of them shouldn't even fertilize. So then you fertilize them. If you do traditional IVF, no ICSI, the best we hope for is 50% of those to fertilize. So when people say to me, why are you doing 100% ICSI when I have normal sperm? Embryos. If I get 50% with normal IVF, just simply putting the egg together with 25,000 sperm and hope they fertilize, versus if I take a sperm and I put it inside the egg, which is ICSI, I get 70% to fertilize. So that means I get 20% more embryos. The game is more eggs, more embryos, more babies. So now I have embryos. But 50% of those embryos that are made are chromosomally abnormal. Mm-hmm. When they're combined together, 50% of those are chromosomally abnormal. Mm-hmm. So now those have to grow. Now, traditionally we used to grow them to day 3, and our pregnancy rates, and people don't believe this, was 15%. And we were on the cover of Time magazine. Mm-hmm. That was insane. That was amazing. And so we've evolved, and when the evolution was, well, what if each day we grow them, nature will figure out which ones are normal, which ones are not. Let nature decide. If they don't grow, not normal. If they do grow, they're normal. And that was the assumption, was that we had a perfect embryo culture. Mm-hmm. Remember, the assumption there is we have a perfect embryo culture. Of course we don't. Our bodies are a perfect culture, but the
Right.
laboratory is an estimate of a good culture limited to three. There's like three culture mediums. That doesn't say a lot about nature. So now we let it grow. So let's say you're 40 years old and you get three beautiful embryos on day 3. Oh, hell, put them in your body.
Right.
There's no benefit to growing them to day 5 in that circumstance. But let's say you're 20 years old and you have 15 beautiful embryos on day 3. Well, hell, you might as well let them grow because you'll have 8 much more likely normal embryos on day 5.
Right.
So that's how you have a conversation with your patients so they understand the process. So there's no one way fits all. As a matter of fact, there are patients who don't get pregnant with day 5 culture and do get pregnant with day 3. Again, that doesn't surprise me because we do not have a perfect culture system. And for whatever reason, there may be factors that we're going to find out in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years inside the uterus we know nothing about, like growth hormone, intrauterine growth factors, who knows? And then all of a sudden we're going to say, oh, we should have been doing this all along.
Right.
You know, adding this to our...
It's interesting that you're saying that because I did have one patient, she was a little older, and her doctor suggested to freeze, I believe it was day 3, like earlier.
That's
another
one. So
yeah.
One, we're talking about pregnancy. So then the other question is when do you freeze? What's the best time to freeze? To be frank with you, the very best time to freeze, and I'll give you the reason, is day 5, 6, or 7. Glasses. Why? Because 98 to 99% of them survive the freezing process. However, very many times women don't make it to day 5 with their embryos, especially if they're older, as you mentioned. Well, in that case, it's kind of a bummer if you run a race and 2 feet before the finish line, they throw away the finish line, right? The finish line transfer. So one is psychological. They want to get a transfer, so let them freeze on day 3. The other thing about freezing on day 3, we only expect 50% to survive the thaw. Now, that may not be true anymore because that's old data. I haven't looked at this in a long time. But the blastocyst freezing process, vitrification, has the best yield. So that might be a reason why you go to day 5. But if you only have 2 or 3 embryos, put them in. Don't do. See, your patient is stuck because this doctor may believe that they can only that frozen embryo transfers are better. So what happens is that people are encouraged by their doctors to do what's best for them. And by the way, their doctors are their doctors, so therefore that is best for them. But if they're looking for alternatives or other opinions, there are many ways to skin a cat. There's many ways to, even acupuncturists, you know, some believe in electroacupuncture, electrostim, some laser, some, you know, and I'm not sure there's a right or wrong. I'm not sure.
Without a doubt. And actually, it's interesting you were talking about the culture. I've heard of endometrial co-culture, follicular fluid co-culture, and I wanted to get your, not thoughts, but knowing on that.
Okay, well, my knowledge about that
is...
okay, no, and the funny thing is, that's one area where I did a lot of work with Klaus Wiemer, who is one of the preeminent embryologists in our field. His whole world was surrounded on co-culture with fallopian tube cells, co-culture. And so it's not done. I mean, the problem is it's not done routinely, and most of us don't use co-culture. It's a complex procedure. You have to get the certain types of cells. There's lots of logistical things that play a role in what they're trying to do. Let me back up a second. What is the purpose of it? The purpose of it is for the very reason I mentioned before. There are many factors that we simply don't know contribute to an egg and an embryo's development. So, since the fertilization of human eggs occurs in the fallopian tube, And the fallopian tube carries about the first 3 to 5 days of development of the embryo.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Gardner, who developed blastocyst culture, studied exactly what was going on in the fallopian tube and designed the media, because it turns out that every, I'll say, inch of the 6 inches of the fallopian tube, there's a different composition of the fluid that's in there. So the evolution of humans was to create a laboratory in the fallopian tubes that would adjust as the embryo grew. So there's so what is doing it? Well, it's the lining of the endothelial cells of the fallopian tube that are manufacturing these factors. So they thought, what if we layer the bottom of our petri dishes, in that case petri dishes, with this layer of cells and let the embryo grow on it? Maybe it'll grow better. Well, we advanced so quickly with the culture system for blastocyst culture, and we went from 15% to 60% pregnancy rates. It's people don't tend to get 61% pregnancy rate is probably not worth the effort, except for that 1% person, where that's a matter of life or death, right?
Yeah.
That 61st person, oh my God, why aren't you doing co-culture? I read a paper and do co-culture.
Right.
Well, it might cost you $100,000 to do an IVF cycle. So now all of a sudden you have to balance.
Is that much money?
No. I'm just no. It's not that much money. My point. If you are using that as an exaggeration, but let's say it's another $5,000 or another $10,000 or another $20,000. Maybe that's the range, because now you have to have FDA approved cultures. You have to have FDA approved media and plating, and they have to be disease free cows. I mean, these are from cows and pigs. These cells. Some people
wow, yeah, because you can't get it. You can't, yeah.
Some people try to harvest the cells from the human, but then you have to have hours and hours of embryology time and technician time. So unless you can go from 15% to 50%,
right,
it's really hard to spend a lot of time and energy. Now, again, I will tell you straight up, I don't follow literature on co-culture because I would say 98% of the IVF centers don't use it. Not because it's bad or not because it shouldn't or couldn't help, but really because you have to weigh in any industry cost-benefit analysis. And again, you only see those people doing papers, or very few clinics doing it, who are doing it, is because they're trying to specialize in that area.
Right. Got it. So it sounds like it's not worth all of the energy and expense compared to like you said, you don't know details.
I don't know the answer to that, but
yeah,
if the person wants it, there may be places that do it routinely. I would go to a place that does it routinely because I don't think it's a trivial thing. I think it's I don't think it's a trivial thing.
And then my other question is, somebody had spoken about, I think that this is a very expensive embryoscope.
Yes, I know.
So you don't have to move it and disturb the embryo as it's growing?
Right. So no, well, okay. That's not the reason. That's not the reason they invented it.
Okay.
That there is a belief. Again, they have yet to prove it, and it's $250,000 per machine. I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting.
No, but what it is it takes a movie of the developing embryo as it cleaves and then becomes a morula, then becomes a blastocyst. And many decades we've believed, and it's not great data, but it's good data that says the morphology or shape or the developmental pathway that an embryo takes can predict outcomes. So the goal was to create a embryoscope. That was one brand, there's many other brands, where you can watch it, and then they actually built computer algorithms to measure things, and they were able to say, okay, this one seems to be growing evenly better than the other one. Let's use that one.
Mm-hmm.
And for years and years, and now probably a decade, they've been trying to prove that it does a hill of beans better than simply what we normally do.
Right.
And it hasn't come to fruition.
Got it.
The companies who make them insist they do.
Of course.
There are people who invested in them insist they do.
Right.
I don't think the American Society for Reproductive Medicine considers it a standard of care. So I would love to have them because I'm a data guy. I love looking at that stuff. I mean, I think it's cool to watch. And I know that at some point we'll have a better understanding of how the shape of the developing blastomeres inside the cleavage cell embryo or the inner cell mass in a blastocyst designs itself. That has to mean something, but again, does it significantly change from a reasonably standard good laboratory outcomes? Even I think this very past ASRM, I don't think they had one paper saying it was better than I just haven't proved it yet. And now it's free, use it. I mean, there's no downside. And if you're not genetic testing, I mean, what the heck? It'll help you maybe sort out which embryos to put in first. But the problem is, it's just not. If you look at, again, the pregnancy rates per egg retrieval, and this is, I'm going to start really hammering this to people. Ask the question, the pregnancy rates per egg retrieval. Don't be duped into the pregnancy rates per transfer. That and even SART is not very good at that, or CDC. They're not that good at that. They're trying to do that because they're doing it per retrieval, but then they break out the data by transfer, and everybody looks at that. I mean, if your practice has a 30% pregnancy rate per retrieval and a 70% pregnancy rate per transfer, which one are you going to market?
Right.
You're just going to market it that way.
Yeah. It's interesting to look at it that way. I mean, my mind is not trained in the way that yours is, but it is interesting how it's just looking at a different lens changes the whole data.
And that's why we're duped. That's why we're duped in elections. We're duped in marketing. We're duped in extra new Tide. Well, what's the packaging? Well, that doesn't mean the Tide is better. It just means it's a nice package, right?
But the thing is, you can see it that way. I think some people just have that mind for it.
Yeah.
And that's why so many people could be duped because they just don't, they're not trained that way.
Yeah.
So it's kind of something to think about.
It's not a good thing for to keep good relationships with people.
Yeah. Because you see everything.
It becomes problematic when Diane and I talk about research.
Right. Nothing passes you. So my question is, since you are such a studies guy and like such a factual guy, what advances are exciting to you? Are there new add-ons? Are there new studies?
Well, guess what's coming down the road?
Tell me.
This get a line. Bloodless IVF.
What is it?
Bloodless IVF.
What is that?
we no longer have to do blood work on our patients. No more sticking for estrogens.
Really?
And take-home ultrasounds. You take home. They have Wi-Fi probes that you rent to your patients for a month, and they can monitor themselves, and they don't have to come in for monitoring. They don't have to come in for blood work. They just come for. And think about that. That means every person in the United States, no matter where you live, can now do IVF, and you may only have to be out of your home for 2 days and not have to travel to big cities. And that means you don't have to worry about getting your OB to do the monitoring or hoping that the monitoring results get to the clinic in time, or worried about your estrogen levels in the 10 or 15 different ways. So that, to me, I just did a live on that last week on Facebook, CNY Fertility, and we're not there yet. We're beginning the process. I'm looking at the papers. Cochrane did a study, looking at not using. So you're just using follicle growth, machine learning, trajectories, and predictability of that trajectory for outcomes. So that's one thing I find really exciting. That to me is really.
So how is it bloodless? How
You
do
don't
you?
draw blood.
So how do you measure it?
You don't have to measure the blood. You only have to measure the follicle size.
It's crazy. That's so different.
And that should, in addition, think about. I spend about on staffing, clinic time. Now you could do IVF center. I could do IVF in a moving van. You don't need it.
Wow, that's crazy. Oh, so that's definitely exciting.
Come to your house, take the eggs out, and then we'll drive back next week and put them back in.
What? That's crazy. All right, my mind's blown already. That's crazy.
Said, what are exciting? That's why.
Yeah, that's definitely exciting. Now, here's my question: Is there, because you mentioned Wi-Fi or monitoring, is there more radiation that way?
No. You always get no. Wi-Fi is how the information goes from the probe, or it can be attached. It goes to your iPhone. It's just like
So the probe is the same thing as an ultrasound.
Yes, except it's completely enclosed. It looks exactly like the vag, but there's no wires. And you just basically place it in your vagina. We teach
my God! Wow.
And and so no work time lost, no traveling, no worry about COVID, no worry about exposures, no worry about having to be stuck and missing the stick and getting stuck again. So
wow.
The other thing is a embryology-free embryology lab. No embryology. Get rid of them. Get a machine that can do ICSI. They're coming down. There's 5 patents. We already have the embryoscope, which is the culture system. We've got an automated vitrification, which means it can freeze them automatically, again, with very little operator involvement. So now you're looking at a level of automation in a very proven field. See, that's the only way you can do this is if you've got 30 years of no changes. And I hate to say that, but in 30 years, we've really not changed very much what we do, essentially. So then you automate it like building a car. It used to be each car was built by hand, and then Ford, he came up with the assembly line. He said, well, why don't we do parts? And then Japan said, why are we using humans? Why don't we use robots to build the cars? Then all of a sudden, you got cars now that go 100,000 miles, don't even need to be tuned up. And they don't break down.
Wow. Amazing. So now is this going to, because I know it's probably going to cost a lot of money starting, but over time, is that going to decrease the IVF price?
This is, want to say hi to Dr. Credenda? She just comes live? No, it's not live. This is Michelle Orbitz. Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
I don't know. How are you?
Good. How are you?
We're talking about what's new in the field of IVF and what's the future look like, and we were just going over vitrification and everything else. Cool. Anyway, I'm in and out. Okay, see you later. You can leave that in.
Okay, cool.
Everybody needs to know who Dr. Credenda is.
Yeah.
So it doesn't cost. See, that's the key. The real cost is human labor.
Right.
That's the real cost. And laboratory building a laboratory. Now, you'll still need to have clinically trained people to interpret the data as it comes in, right? And so that's going to be people doing that. But honestly, they're only going to check much. By the way, right now, PGTA, remember pre-implantation genetic testing? That was done by geneticists. In other words, that was absolutely, and that's these guys.
Yeah.
Now it's completely done by machine learning. Geneticists are not involved anymore. If you look at Cooper Genomics, PGT2 or something, it's completely done by artificial intelligence. Wow. Now they're not lowering the price, nor did it. All they did was data crunching. So, like for example, I work for CNY Fertility. We do 10,000 cycles a year. Think about how quickly we can use and learn a bloodless IVF or a new piece of equipment. Well, because I will have millions of data points. But you get these mom and pop operations, of which I was a mom and pop operation doing 200 or 300 a year. It's very hard for them to contribute to the science. So the volume of data that's out there, we just need to collect it and use it. So that's the second area. The third area, I think, is the American Board of Oriental Reproductive Medicine. You guys are now, I hope, and I keep insisting, moving beyond IVF. Endometriosis, fibroids, managing PCOS, managing pelvic pain, managing recurrent pregnancy losses. It's not just pregnancy, it's fecundity. How do we get to a baby? Right. So we've got a lot of smart people asking a lot of smart questions. And I think you'll find with CNY Fertility, 100% of my patients are recommended strongly to do traditional Chinese medicine in the form of acupuncture. And I, 100% of them, push them towards the American Board of Oriental Reproductive Medicine. But it's now up to the American Board of Reproductive Medicine to push themselves into new areas and do some basic research. Oh, Christ, genetic engineering. I mean, CRISPR technology. Well, that's scary good. Because that means that we're going to be able to fix genetic errors in embryos. It's been done already once or twice.
So like BRCA gene, or is that what you mean? Yeah. So you're able to fix it.
Yes, you're able to do genetic. That's what CRISPR does.
That's interesting.
The news. The other thing, and this is really happening, stem cell derived sperm and stem cell derived eggs. Get a swab from a 50-year-old woman, and we grow new eggs.
What?
Get a swab from a 50-year-old man.
Oh my God. All right, officially my mind is blown.
Oh, it's fascinating.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
To say the least.
Yeah. So those are some of the areas I think, we're looking maybe 10 years, 20 years. I don't know. But I think more quickly, bloodless IVF is going to come pretty quickly. I think the automation of the embryology lab has to be done. The modularization of satellites. If we don't have to have big buildings to do ultrasounds and blood work, because that's what the building is for, because we only use one room to do retrievals and transfers, but we have 50 rooms to do ultrasounds and blood work. So if we don't have to have 50 rooms, then you can literally do it in a truck.
Yeah.
Like the MRIs, they drive up the MRI trucks, drive up to hospitals and do it. The MRI is outside in a truck.
Amazing. It's crazy. Yeah.
And many people have in rural America, they have whole clinics that drive to people's out there because they don't have transportation. There is no way in my mind that we can't create mobile IVF retrieval and transfer. It's just it doesn't. Yeah, it's just so doable.
Yeah. And it would definitely be helpful in these times for sure. One question, because I have to get off soon, but I have a question, another question that seems to be something that was, I guess there's like different schools of thought where it used to be thought that women after transfers should just be on bed rest.
Okay.
And then now people are saying that it's better to do activity. So I wanted to know your
data.
Yeah, your data. Tell me.
The data has shown there is no benefit for bed rest. But I still recommend it.
Okay. Why?
Because I'm an old man and I know my patients have been through a lot of stress and they just need a goddamn break. Okay. That's why. But honestly, one study demonstrated a reduction in pregnancy rates if you stayed still versus immediate activity. I think it's a small study. But the good news, when I first started, you had 14 days of bed rest, strict. Then we did 5 days of strict bed rest. Then it was 2 days of modified bed rest. And now I do think, seriously, the patient needs to get, and you know this better than I, to get into the right headspace after going through 11 days of stim and medicines and shots and being probed and pushed. let them go home. Let their husbands cook them dinner or their partners cook them dinner. Sit down, think about pregnancy, think about the future, think about being pregnant. Rest that day. Now we'll go back to work. Rest. Now so you don't have to rest.
So rest doesn't mean stay in bed necessarily.
Exactly.
It's more of a mental kind of like take a day off, take a couple of days off.
It's yes, exactly. It's a mental health day. And so I don't worry. I used to say, don't go up and downstairs. I used to say all these things. Now just, chill out for a couple of days. And I like your feet to be elevated. Why? Because it pulls the blood in the pelvis. And we know that implantation is going to take place in the next 48 hours. Give yourself a break.
Well, I've even heard of a study of laughter therapy after transfer. I don't know if you've heard about this.
I did, of course. It's out of Israel. It was a study done in Israel using clown therapy. It's one study. It's not.
Yeah, I know. That's what I figured you were going to say. I'm getting to know you now.
It's a good study, but I make everybody laugh. So I think that's why my pregnancy rates are so great.
Yeah, I believe in laughter. I think laughter is really good. I mean, you feel good doing it. I mean, that should be a sign, right?
Oh, it's endorphins. Yeah. It's goodness. It's the juice of life.
For sure.
Laughter is, it's the juice of life. It keeps you moist.
That's right. Bada bing. Awesome. Well, this was great. I feel like I got the full amount of questions and we didn't have to cut short, which I'm so happy about. Thank you so much for all of your great information.
Okay, my pleasure, you guys. Everybody out there, healthy body is a fertile body. That's the key. And then I think with acupuncture, you have a real partner in helping you achieve that healthy state to be fertile. So thanks, Michelle. I really appreciate it. Anytime, if you guys want to talk, happy to talk.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.